My wife will never leave me, Kaido said, the words curling with expensive whiskey and smoke in the low-lit room. A ripple of sycophantic laughter went through his lieutenants. They sat around a low table, the air thick with the smell of leather and masculine certainty. Kaido leaned back, a portrait of control, his tailored suit uncreased, his smile a sharp, confident slash. She knows her place. She knows what I have given her. A woman like that, she doesn't walk away from a life like this. He gestured vaguely with his glass, a gesture that encompassed the glittering Tokyo skyline visible through the panoramic window, the power humming in the very walls of the building, the absolute dominion he held over his world. He believed it. Every syllable. It was as true to him as the rising sun. But 12 floors below, in the silent, sprawling apartment that was more a gilded cage than a home, Naomi was proving him catastrophically wrong. The final click of a zipper on a black suitcase was the only sound in the cavernous bedroom. It was a sound as definitive as a gunshot, a quiet punctuation mark at the end of a long, suffocating sentence. She stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate, not the frantic scurrying of someone escaping, but the calm, measured actions of a person executing a plan years in the making. She wore a simple beige dress, the fabric soft against her skin. It was the color of sand, of earth, of something neutral and foundational. It was a stark contrast to the jewel-toned silks and velvets that filled her closet, gifts from him, costumes for the role she played. This dress was her own. She had bought it herself on a rare afternoon of solitude, and in its simplicity, she felt more herself than she had in 3 years. The apartment was a monument to his taste. Minimalist, cold, with vast expanses of polished marble and dark wood. Art hung on the walls, chosen for its investment value, not its beauty. There was nothing of her here, not really. Every object was a reflection of him. She ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of her suitcase. It was a single bag. Not much for 3 years of a life, but everything she wanted to take was inside it. Inside were carefully folded clothes, a small collection of books he would have called sentimental, and a passport with her maiden name tucked into an inner pocket. She had renewed it 6 months ago, a secret act of rebellion that had felt like breathing after being held underwater. Her hands were steady. Her heart, a frantic bird in her chest for so long, was finally, blessedly still. She walked through the silent living room, her bare feet making no sound on the imported rugs. The city lights bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the cavernous space into a diorama of a life she was about to abandon. She paused by the entryway, near a small table where a single, perfect white orchid sat in a black vase. He loved orchids. He loved their exotic, demanding beauty. He loved that they were difficult to keep alive, a testament to his ability to control even nature. She looked at its flawless petals and felt nothing. Not hatred, not sadness. Just a profound and hollow emptiness. The emotion had been burned out of her over 1,000 quiet nights just like this one. Nights spent waiting for the sound of his key in the door. Nights spent perfecting the art of being invisible until she was wanted. The clock on the wall, a stark, digital display, read 11:47 p.m. He would be home soon. He was predictable in his routines, a creature of habit who believed his control over his schedule extended to the hearts of those around him. That predictability, once a source of dread, was now her greatest ally. It was the framework upon which she had built her escape. She moved to the kitchen, a space of stainless steel and black granite that looked as though it had never been used for anything as messy as actual cooking. She opened a drawer, her fingers bypassing the silver to find a small, worn wooden box tucked in the back. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew its contents by heart. She simply held it, the wood warm against her palm. It was the only thing in this entire apartment that felt truly real. Inside was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. He had given it to her on their second date, before the empire of his life had fully revealed itself to her. They had been walking through a park, and he had bought it from an old man selling trinkets from a cart. "For my beautiful songbird," he had whispered, his voice different then, softer, stripped of the arrogance that would later become its primary register. So you never forget how to fly. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. He had spent the next 3 years methodically clipping her wings, isolating her from her friends, her family, her own sense of self, until she was just another beautiful object in his collection. She remembered the man who had given her that bird. She had loved him, or at least the idea of him. A powerful man with a secret gentleness. But it was a lie. The gentleness was a tactic, a lure. The real Kaido was the man laughing with his subordinates 12 floors up, boasting of his ownership over her soul. Holding the bird now, she didn't feel the sting of nostalgia. She felt the cold clarity of betrayal. It wasn't a reminder of a love she was losing. It was evidence of a love that had never existed at all. It was the first piece of the cage. She slipped the small wooden box into the pocket of her dress. It was the only thing of his she was taking with her. Not as a memento, but as a reminder. A reminder of the cost of believing in beautiful lies. In the smoky room upstairs, Kaido's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. It was Riku, his second-in-command, a man with a face like a clenched fist. Kaido ignored it, waving a dismissive hand. Business can wait. He was performing for his men, reinforcing the image of a man so in command that even his own empire had to wait for him. Another drink, he ordered, and a younger man scrambled to refill his glass. Kaido savored the fear and respect in the man's eyes. It was a currency he understood better than any other. He did, however, pull out his personal phone and check for messages from Naomi. There were none. A tiny fissure of annoyance cracked through his good mood. She was supposed to text him. She always texted him around this time, a simple, deferential message asking when he would be home, a message that soothed the part of him that always needed to know he was being thought of, waited for. The silence was a deviation from the pattern, and he despised deviations. He typed a quick, sharp message. "Where are you?" He didn't add a question mark. It wasn't a question. It was a command for a status report. He hit send and placed the phone face down on the table, expecting the immediate buzz of a reply. When it didn't come, the fissure of annoyance deepened into something colder. He told himself she was probably asleep. She was delicate, he often thought, someone who needed her rest. It was a convenient fiction, one that allowed him to see her lack of engagement not as disinterest, but as a charming fragility he was tasked to protect. The men around him were discussing a rival organization, their voices low and sharp with violence. Kaido listened with half an ear, his mind drifting back to the silent apartment, to his silent wife. He pictured her in their bed, her dark skin a beautiful contrast against his white sheets, her breathing soft and even. The image calmed him. She was where she was supposed to be. Safe. Contained. His. Naomi's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. She saw his name flash on the screen. "Where are you?" She read the words and felt a cold, distant calm. There was a time a message like that would have sent a spike of anxiety through her, a frantic need to reply immediately, perfectly, in a way that would soothe and placate him. Now, she just looked at it. It was the message of a zookeeper checking on an exhibit. She slid the phone into her pocket without answering. A moment later, it buzzed again. A different name. Maya. Her best friend. The only person from her old life she had managed to hold on to, a connection maintained through clandestine calls and coded emails. She answered, her voice a low murmur. "Hey, are you out?" Maya's voice was tight with worry, a lifeline of genuine human concern in a world of artifice. "Not yet. Soon. Is everything ready?" "The car is waiting 2 blocks away, just like we planned. The driver's name is Mr. Chen. He won't speak to you, just drive." Every detail had been meticulously planned over weeks of secret conversations. Maya had been her general, her strategist, her unwavering support. "I know," Naomi said, her gaze sweeping over the silent apartment one last time. "I have everything." "Naomi, are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back. You know that, right? He's not the kind of man who just lets go." Naomi looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. A woman in a plain beige dress, her face pale but resolute. I'm not the kind of woman who can stay, she replied. I'm already gone, Maya. My body is just catching up, a pause on the other end of the line, and then Maya's voice, thick with emotion. Okay.
Okay.
I love you. Be safe. I love you, too, Naomi whispered, and ended the call. The digital clock now read 12:03 a.m. It was time. She took a deep breath, walked to the front door, and placed her hand on the cold, steel handle. Her fingers were steady. She was not a bird in a cage. She was the hand opening the door. And it's at moments like this, isn't it, when a whole life pivots on a single, quiet action that you can almost feel the universe holding its breath. You know that feeling when you're on the edge of a massive change and everything is both terrifying and perfectly clear. If you've ever felt that, if you're rooting for Naomi to just open that door and walk, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Let the algorithm know that stories about courage are what we need right now. Because what happens next, it's the collision you've been waiting for. The sound of Kaito's key in the lock was sharper than she expected. Naomi's hand froze on the handle, a jolt of pure, cold adrenaline shooting through her. He was early. The one variable she hadn't accounted for. Her meticulously planned timeline crumbled in a single, metallic click. The heavy door swung inward, and he was there, filling the frame. He looked tired, the mask of command slipping just enough to show the man beneath. Then he saw her, standing by the door, the suitcase beside her. For a long second, he didn't process it. His brain, so accustomed to order and control, couldn't assemble the pieces into the picture they so clearly made. He smiled, a weary but genuine smile. There you are. I was getting worried. He started to loosen his tie, his movements automatic. I texted you. Then his eyes properly registered the suitcase. It sat on the marble floor like an unexploded bomb. The smile vanished. Confusion clouded his features. He looked from the suitcase to her face, then back again. What's this? He asked, his voice still casual, but with a new, hard edge underneath. Are you meeting a friend at the airport? You didn't tell me. He was offering her an out, a plausible explanation that would restore order to his world. She just had to take it.
Lie.
Make it make sense. But she was done with lies. She was done with making him comfortable. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable, and said nothing. The silence stretched, thin and taut. It was an answer more damning than any word she could have spoken. Naomi, he said, his voice dropping, losing all its earlier warmth. He took a step into the apartment, letting the door click shut behind him. The sound sealed them in. What is this? Stop playing games. He gestured at the suitcase, an angry, dismissive flick of his wrist. You're going somewhere? It was almost a joke, a last-ditch attempt to frame the scene as something absurd, something not to be taken seriously. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken conversations. I'm leaving, Kaito, 3 words. They landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. He actually recoiled, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. Then he laughed. It wasn't the confident laugh from upstairs. This was a harsh, ragged sound, full of disbelief and insult. Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. Leaving to go where? You have everything here. He started to walk towards her, his old confidence reasserting itself. He saw this as a tantrum, a moment of female hysteria that required his firm, guiding hand. Whatever it is, we'll sort it out in the morning. You're tired. I'm tired. He reached for her arm, to lead her away from the door, away from this foolishness. She stepped back. It was a small movement, but it was a wall rising between them. His hand fell, hovering in the empty space. His face hardened. The mask of the patient husband fell away, revealing the cold fury of the oyabun beneath. Do not disrespect me, Naomi. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A persistent, angry vibration. Riku again. Business. His empire was calling, demanding his attention, but for the first time, the world outside this apartment ceased to exist. All that mattered was this quiet rebellion, this inexplicable defiance that threatened the very foundation of his reality. He ignored the call. Tell me what this is about, he demanded. Is it about the dinner last week? Did one of my associates say something to you? I will handle it. He was trying to find a logical reason, a problem he could solve with money or violence. He couldn't comprehend that the problem was him. It's not about last week, she said, her voice steady. It's about everything. He stared at her, genuinely baffled. Everything? What is everything? I gave you everything. His voice rose, the carefully controlled modulation cracking under the strain. This apartment, the clothes you wear, the food you eat. Do you think this life just happens? I built this. For you. For us. He was a king listing the splendors of a kingdom to a subject who was daring to complain. He truly believed in his own benevolence. He believed the cage was a gift. That was the most terrifying part. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned and walked away from the door, back towards the bedroom. He thought for a moment she was acquiescing, that the tantrum was over. He followed her, a sense of relief washing over him. But she didn't go to the bed. She went to the antique dresser on her side of the room, a piece he'd bought at an auction in Paris. She pulled open the bottom drawer, the one filled with silk scarves she never wore. She reached deep into the back, underneath the layers of color, and pulled out a small, lacquered box. Not the wooden one in her pocket. This one was different. It was his. He recognized it instantly. A cold dread, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, snaked its way up his spine. He knew what was inside. He hadn't seen it in years, had assumed it was lost, or that she would never find it. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. She didn't answer. She placed the box on the dresser and lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of thin, airmail envelopes, tied with a faded red ribbon. Letters. She picked up the top one. Her hand was shaking now, just slightly. I was looking for a photograph of my mother, she said, her voice distant, as if narrating a story about someone else. It fell behind the dresser. When I moved it, I found this. Taped to the back, she looked at him, and for the first time, he saw not just resolve in her eyes, but a deep, profound pity. And that was worse than her anger. It stripped him of all his power. The truth has a way of sucking all the air out of a room, doesn't it? It arrives uninvited and changes the very molecules of the space you're in. We've all been there, on one side or the other of a revelation that changes everything. If you're holding your breath right now, wondering what's in those letters, drop a comment and let me know. It's a strange thing to feel connected to a story this way, but we're in this together. Let's see this through. Kaito stared at the letters, his mind racing. He could deny it. He could create a story, a lie so convincing that even he might start to believe it. It was his greatest skill. But looking at Naomi's face, at the quiet, devastating certainty in her eyes, he knew it was useless. She already knew. She wrote to her sister. Naomi said, her voice barely audible. She wasn't reading from the letter, she was quoting from memory. She had read them all, over and over, until the words were burned into her. She said you told her it was for her own safety, that your world was too dangerous. She said she believed you. At first she paused, her gaze locking with his. These are dated a year after you told me she died in that car accident. The accusation hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. His first wife, Hannah. The tragic, beautiful ghost whose memory he had used to bind Naomi to him. He had painted himself as a widower, a man who had loved and lost, making Naomi feel like his salvation, his second chance at a happiness that had been cruelly snatched away. It was all a lie. Hannah hadn't died. He had divorced her, sent her away, cut her off from everyone she knew, and paid her a fortune for her silence. He had erased her. She didn't die, did she, Kaito? Naomi asked, the question a soft, brutal blow. You just put her away. Like a beautiful painting you got tired of looking at. He had no words. His entire life was built on a scaffolding of carefully constructed narratives. He was the master of his own story. And in one moment, she had torn it all down. All he could manage was a choked, fragmented sound. You don't understand. Oh, I think I do, she said, and for the first time, a flicker of something hard and sharp entered her voice. It was the sound of a woman who had finally found her anger. I understand perfectly. I was never your second chance. I was just your second choice. A replacement. And you built my cage out of the bars from hers. She let the letter slip from her fingers. It fluttered onto the polished floor. He looked at the small white rectangle, and it felt like a verdict. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. He was the one who was trapped, cornered by a truth he could no longer control. His empire, his men, his money, none of it mattered in this room. Here, he was just a man, stripped bare by his own deceit. And then, he did something she never expected. He broke. The fury, the arrogance, the cold control, it all dissolved, leaving behind something raw and terrified. "Please," he whispered, the word ragged, torn from him.
"Naomi."
"Please don't go." He took a tentative step towards her, his hands open, palms up. A gesture of surrender. "Everything you said, that's true. I was a coward. I was wrong. But I can change. I will change." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. It was the most vulnerable she had ever seen him, the most honest he had ever been. He was no longer the Oyabun, the powerful Mafia boss. He was just a man, terrified of being alone. "I love you," he said, and the words sounded strange, as if he were saying them for the first time. "I know I have never shown it right. I don't know how, but I do. Don't leave me alone in this place for a single, dangerous moment," she wavered. This was the man she thought she had glimpsed all those years ago in the park. The man underneath the monster. A flicker of hope, treacherous and seductive, sparked within her. The hope that she could save him. The hope that this breaking point was a real beginning. The choice was suddenly, agonizingly real. The safety of the waiting car and a new, unknown life, or the terrifying, uncertain hope of salvaging the man in front of her. She looked from his desperate face to the suitcase waiting by the door. One was a future she had to build from scratch. The other was a past that promised to be different, a promise made by a man whose entire life was a lie. She let the silence hang in the air, let him stand in the wreckage he had created. She looked at his face, the face she had once loved, and saw the deep, intricate latticework of his lies. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also understood its source. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing his reflection in her eyes. He was afraid of being alone with himself. The flicker of hope died, starved of oxygen. It was replaced by a calm, sad certainty. Some things, once broken, could never be truly mended. You could glue the pieces together, but the cracks would always show. "It's too late," she said softly. The words were not an attack, but a statement of fact. A diagnosis. She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't try to stop her. The raw honesty of his plea had drained him of his last defense. He just stood there, a statue in the center of his empty kingdom. She picked up her suitcase. It felt lighter now. She walked to the door, her steps even and sure. She paused with her hand on the handle and looked back at him one last time. He was still standing by the dresser, looking at the scattered letters on the floor. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. "Goodbye, Kaito," she said. And then she opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and closed it gently behind her. The click was soft, but for him, it was the sound of the world ending. He was left in the crushing silence, the scent of her perfume a ghost in the air. He sank to his knees, the polished marble cold against his skin. The king was alone in his castle, and he finally understood that the walls had been built to keep him in, not to keep the world out. 6 months later, light streamed into a small apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The walls were covered in canvases, some finished, some in progress, all bursting with vibrant, chaotic color. Naomi stood in the middle of the room, a smudge of cobalt blue on her cheek, wearing an old, paint-splattered t-shirt and jeans. She was working on a new piece, a vast abstract of swirling greens and golds. She was smiling. Maya sat on a worn armchair, sipping tea. "It's beautiful," she said, nodding towards the canvas. "What is it?" Naomi dipped her brush in yellow paint and added a slash of sunlight to the canvas. I'm not sure yet, she said. But it feels like breathing. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the scrape of the brush on canvas and the hum of the city outside. It was a different city, thousands of miles away from Tokyo. A city where she was just Naomi, a painter. Not a wife, not a possession. Just herself. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. A gallery owner, confirming a time for a studio visit. Her first one. A small, nervous thrill went through her. It was a beginning. A real one. A world away, Kaito sat in the same dark, smoky room from that night, 12 floors above the city. The same lieutenants were there, their faces a mixture of fear and deference. Riku was presenting a report, his voice a low drone. Kaito wasn't listening. He was staring out the window at the endless sprawl of Tokyo, a city he owned but could no longer feel. He had won the war with the rival clan. His power was more absolute than ever. But the victory felt hollow, tasteless. He was surrounded by people, yet he had never felt more alone. Later that night, he returned to the silent, cavernous apartment. He had not changed a thing. Her clothes were still in the closet, her perfume still on the vanity. It was a mausoleum. He walked to the nightstand on her side of the bed. Sitting there, where she had left it, was the small, crudely carved wooden bird. He had found it after she was gone. She had left it behind. A final, silent statement. It wasn't a reminder for her. It was a message for him. He picked it up, the worn wood smooth in his palm. He thought of her words. So you never forget how to fly. He had been so sure she would never leave. He had built a cage of gold and silk and called it a life. But he had forgotten one crucial thing about songbirds. Cages don't stop them from knowing they have wings. He closed his hand around the small wooden bird, the sharp edges digging into his palm, and for the first time in his life, Kaito wept.